Welcome to my channel where I do spoiler-free discourses on books that I find interesting. And usually what I'll do is I'll present the edition that I'm reading, but I would like to clarify that editions don't really mean that much to me, because the content is really king when it comes to these, to books in general. So having a nice edition, a good thing, but it's not really crucial. It's not really necessary, because the content is the most important thing. And I'll do a review of like certain grimoires and books of this type that are wonderful editions and they're terrible content. So then what's the point? So I'd rather have a really good content than a bad edition, if that was the choice. But today I'm going to go over the Unfinished Tales by J.R.R. Tolkien. And this book is, well, first of all, it manifests the genius of J.R.R. Tolkien. But first, let me look at the edition from Harper Collins. The edition is really a wonderful edition because of the quality. It has a slipcase, as you'll be able to see over here. So it has a good slipcase, which I when I was younger, I didn't like slipcases. I didn't get it. Now I get it. So I like the slipcase because it really protects the book itself, the integrity of the book. Plus, they're putting more effort, is the right way to say it, into the book, so that has value to me. That they're giving a lot more importance to the quality of the book. The pages inside are very good because they're thick. So the thickness of the page is really good. The quality of the paper is really good. A lot of times people don't notice these things, but they do matter. Not only for, if I want to leave this as a legacy for my children, for example, they'll last longer, the better the quality of the page. And it has really nice artwork in the front, and in the back it has a very good map, kind of an updated map, if you will. Now going to the content, which again is the most important, it's kind of weird because when I read these books, I always feel strange because I am immersing myself in a very dramatic, very extensive fake history, meaning it's a history that's not real. It's a history of Tolkien that Tolkien came up with to kind of underpin the story, the mythos of the Lord of the Rings. Now, this is a book you should read, obviously after the Silmarillion and after the Lord of the Rings itself and the Hobbit, just because this book is within that context, and I'll do reviews of those books later on. But again, the content is very complex, very intricate, and I always feel silly because I feel that I should be reading an actual history book, and that most of my books in my collection are, in my personal library, most of my books are history, theology, philosophy. So there are better books there to read about actual so-called real world than a fictional history. But I would like to say that the reason that it's interesting is that Tolkien was a Catholic, for example. So he had an Abrahamic conception of history and mythology. And what I mean by that, without being disrespectful to anyone who's watching, what I mean by is that the mythos, the mythical, and mythical doesn't mean false or fictional per se, but the mythical component of his work is a component of an overarching concept that history itself is a divine exchange between the deity and his creation. And the Lord of the Rings is kind of an example of that because he's placing a whole world where you have, especially in the Silmarillion, you do have a metaphysic you do have a conception of existence, of reality, how the world started, the beings that inhabit this world. So within that context, within that world, he puts a historical context to make sense of it. And Abrahamic religions have that natural inclination as well. The Bible is in the same structure. There's a presupposition that the history in the Bible is real and that it is relevant to the eschatological content of the book, right? That salvation, that the exchange between the divine and the human, it's all part of a historical reality. If you took this away, it would really affect the Abrahamic conception of itself. And this is why most Islamic scholars and Jewish scholars and Christian scholars spend a lot of time in proving the historicity of their document, because it's the quintessential aspect of their legitimacy, metaphysically speaking. Whereas in Norse mythology or even Roman so-called paganism and Greek so-called paganism, the historicity of it was not that important. It was, it could be assumed to be mythical, it could be assumed to be real, but it was not the main aspect that kind of granted legitimacy to their beliefs. Here, Tolkien is doing the same thing. His inclination is to grant legitimacy to his mythos of the Lord of the Rings by creating a vast array and complex system of historicity and languages, linguistics, etc. And I know that he, as a scholar, that was his interest. But what I'm saying is that my interpretation is that he has an inclination that comes from his religious background to grant legitimacy to his work by creating this very vast, very complex system of mythology. So anyway, at least that's what I find interesting in the work, even though I know I'm reading a fictional, absurdly complex fictional history of a world that doesn't exist. Nonetheless, it is important for me to point out that just because something is fictional doesn't necessarily mean it doesn't have an effect in the real world. Everything that is in the world affects itself. So even if I create a work of fiction, if people read it and behave in a particular way as it relates to that work, then that work became real. So if you have people that are influenced by Lord of the Rings and then they conduct themselves in a particular way, or view history, their own real history, in a particular way, that's going to have an actual real world effect anyway. So it would be unfair to the artist, to the painter, to the poet, to make the claim that everything they do is basically nonsense fiction or false, or because at the end of the day, their art does have an actual influence in the real world, in politics and history. But nonetheless, knowing the history of the hobbits, or of the Druiden, or of any of these mythical races, it still feels like I'm wasting my time in a strange way. So, but it is a very wonderful, enjoyable work, and it's very difficult not to enjoy Tolkien's work, even if it's a flight of fancy for some. But the historical and the theological underpinnings of it are very interesting, and I'll go more into that in the Silmarillion. Because I think that's where he shines when it comes to these topics. What I find most interesting, if I'm going to mention something, again, spoiler-free, I do my best, is the story of Gandalf and Saruman. I find that interesting because the speculation that Tolkien had in his notes about their origin and how they assumed a human form, even though they're very powerful. They're assuming human form to come into the earth and influence those around to fight against Sauron. I find that interesting. A lot of people have written another essays on this topic of whether or not Gandalf is a Christological character. So here in those notes, the idea that he's a being that comes from another realm that is very powerful and he assumes human form, it may sound Christological, but it's, in my opinion, it's not, because Gandalf is not really a deity. But deities are sending him. So it depends if you're a Neo-Aryan or Aryan Christian, then maybe this could be a viewpoint, right? Because even the Jehovah's Witnesses, for example, they see Michael the Archangel as being Jesus, right? That kind of thing. So if that's the way you see it, then Gandalf could be a Christological character within that paradigm. But in the most kind of mainstream, kind of normative Christianity, that Christological imagery just doesn't fit. That's just my opinion. Feel free to comment, subscribe, and if you like the content, then you can comment, and I'll do my best to kind of respond if there's anything interesting there. Thank you for tuning in.